When you withdraw your voice from a woman's world, something profound begins to stir. Silence is never empty. It is filled with answers, revelations, and transformations. When the air grows still and her phone no longer rings with the familiar call of your name, a woman turns inward. It is not an act of weakness, but of necessity. She begins to walk through the corridors of her own memory, tracing the footsteps she left behind long before you entered her world. Silence, my dear, has a way of pressing her face gently against the mirror of her soul, demanding that she see herself not as she was reflected in your eyes, but as she truly is when stripped of another's opinion. And in that quiet, she begins to notice things she once ignored. The way her laughter used to echo without hesitation, the dreams she whispered to herself as a girl, the desires she put on pause while standing in the shadows of another's needs. She begins to remember that she was whole long before you noticed her, and she will be whole long after you have gone. Self-reflection is not a soft act, it is a fierce one. For when a woman sits with her silence, she is confronted with truths that cannot be dismissed with distraction. She begins to weigh her choices, her sacrifices, her hopes, and her heartaches. She asks herself questions that sting. Have I loved myself as much as I have loved others? Have I demanded enough respect for the gift of my presence? Have I made myself small so another could feel tall? These questions are not comfortable, but they are necessary, and in the answering of them, she begins to rebuild herself brick by brick. A woman in self-reflection is a woman gathering her strength, not for revenge, not for resistance, but for resurrection. In this quiet study of her spirit, she starts to pull back the layers of expectation the world has placed on her. She recalls the times she silenced her voice because she feared it would be too loud. She remembers the moments she accepted less than she deserved because she did not want to seem ungrateful, and she begins to feel a stirring, a rising tide of truth within her chest. She sees that her love is not a small offering, but a vast treasure, and anyone who receives it must come prepared to honor it fully. Self-reflection becomes the polishing of that treasure, the acknowledgement that her worth was never diminished by absence, only revealed more brightly through it. And as the silence stretches, she grows acquainted with herself in ways she may have long forgotten. She may sit by a window in the late hours of the night, listening to the rhythm of her own breathing, and realize that she is at peace in her own company. She may pick up a journal, a brush, a book, or a dream once abandoned, and recognize that the world inside her is just as full, just as vibrant, just as complete as the world she shared with another. The more she reflects, the more she begins to see the beauty of her solitude, the richness of her own thoughts, the dignity of her own presence. And in this mirror of silence, she sees not only who she is, but who she has always had the power to become. When silence falls between her and the one who once held her attention, a woman begins to rise, not with haste, not with bitterness, but with a deliberate gathering of herself. The absence becomes a stage upon which she remembers the role she was always meant to play, the leading role in her own life. For too long, she may have carried the weight of compromise, bending her back to hold up the comfort of others, trimming her brilliance so as not to outshine the ones who stood beside her. But when the calls stop, when the messages fade into nothingness, she steps into the vastness of her own presence, and there she begins the work of reclaiming the power that was never truly gone, only misplaced beneath layers of doubt, affection, or sacrifice. Power, you see, does not vanish. It waits, it lingers, it hums beneath the skin until a woman has the courage to claim it once again. In the act of reclamation, she starts by remembering what she has endured, the storms she has weathered, the nights she has cried and still managed to rise with swollen eyes yet unbroken spirit, the obstacles she has overcome that others may never fully know. She takes inventory of her survival and realizes that survival itself is a form of power. It is a kind of strength that does not shout but speaks steadily, a strength that whispers, "I am still here." And with that recognition, she straightens her spine. She no longer asks permission to exist, no longer waits for affirmation to validate her worth. She understands that her power does not rest in another's acknowledgement, but in her own undeniable truth. This reclamation is not loud at first. It is quiet, steady, and deeply personal. She may begin by saying no where once she always said yes. She may start to walk away from tables where love is begged for crumbs, realizing that she deserves the full feast of reciprocity. She may release friendships, habits, or environments that drain her spirit, and though it stings to let them go, she knows that every departure makes room for something greater. Each small act of self-respect becomes an ember, and soon those embers ignite into a flame. That flame is her power reclaiming itself, reminding her that she is not defined by loss, but by the strength to rise after it. And as this flame grows, she begins to step more boldly into the world. She remembers her talents, her voice, her vision, and she moves with a renewed authority. The same voice that once trembled now speaks with clarity, not because she has forgotten pain, but because she has learned that pain, too, is a teacher. Her power is no longer tied to whether someone chooses to see her. It is rooted in the fact that she has chosen to see herself. With each step, each boundary, each declaration of her worth, she reclaims ground that was always hers to stand upon. And in reclaiming it, she does not only rise for herself, but for every woman who has ever been told to sit quietly in the shadows, every heart that has ever been diminished by the absence of acknowledgement, every soul that has ever wondered if they were enough. For in her reclamation, she becomes a reminder that power never leaves a woman. It waits patiently for her return to it. When the current of silence stretches long enough, when her days are no longer filled with the echo of another's presence, a woman begins to hear something else rising from within her, the whispers of the dreams she once laid aside. For too long, perhaps, she may have tucked her aspirations neatly into the back of her mind, telling herself she would return to them later, after the needs of others were met, after the noise of daily demands had quieted, after the love she poured out had been reciprocated. But silence is a peculiar teacher, for in its embrace, she begins to remember those forgotten desires, those visions that once gave her life its fire. The absence of constant distraction allows her to see herself not only as she is, but as she once dared to imagine she could be. And in that remembrance, the renewal of her dreams begins to stir. She recalls the girl she once was, the one who looked out of windows with eyes wide open to the horizon, who filled notebooks with plans, who believed that her life was destined for more than survival alone. She may remember the paintbrush she put down when responsibilities pressed too heavy, the song she stopped singing when fear of judgment grew louder than the melody, the business she never started, the journey she never took, the story she never told. And as these memories resurface, she does not mourn them as lost. She claims them as seeds. Seeds that may have been buried beneath the soil of compromise and neglect, but seeds that are still alive, waiting patiently for her to water them with new courage. Dreams do not die easily. They lie dormant, and when a woman turns her face back toward them, they awaken with a quiet power that insists she begin again. In this renewal, she begins to set intentions not out of desperation, but out of vision. She picks up the journal once more, this time not to write about loss or longing, but to sketch plans, to craft possibilities, to weave the fabric of her tomorrow with threads of determination. She looks at the places where she shrank herself and decides to expand, not with arrogance, but with authenticity. And as she moves, she does so with an energy that is both familiar and new. Familiar because it is the same fire she once carried. New because it is now fortified by wisdom, by scars, by the lessons of what it means to give and to lose. Her dreams take on a new weight, a new urgency, because she has learned that time is too precious to keep postponing her own becoming. This renewal of dreams is not about selfishness, it is about wholeness. For when she honors her dreams, she honors the truth of who she is. And when she breathes life into those visions, she gives permission to others to do the same. She stands taller, she speaks clearer, she moves with purpose because she is no longer waiting for someone else to validate the life she imagined. She is choosing to live it. And as she steps forward, the woman who once silenced her dreams in the name of love, in the name of fear, in the name of compromise, becomes the woman who understands that every dream she carries is a prayer, every vision a promise, every desire a declaration that she was meant for more. And with each act of renewal, she writes herself back into the story she once began but left unfinished. Silence is not emptiness. It is a language of its own. When a woman is met with silence, when the constant hum of contact falls away and she is left only with her thoughts, something profound begins to happen within her spirit. At first, the quiet may feel heavy, unsettling, like a weight pressing against her chest. She may search for the familiar noise of reassurance, for the voice that once filled her mornings, or the presence that steadied her nights. But as the hours stretch and the days unfold, she begins to see that silence is not her enemy. It is her mirror. It reflects back to her the parts of herself she overlooked, the truths she avoided, the strength she underestimated. And slowly, she begins to transform, not by external force, but by the quiet revolution that takes place within. In that silence, she learns patience with herself. She realizes that she can sit in a room alone and not feel diminished, that she can walk through the world without needing constant acknowledgement, that her existence is not validated by noise but by her own being. The silence teaches her to listen more closely, not just to the world, but to the inner voice she once drowned out with distraction. She hears the whisper of her intuition, steady and wise, reminding her that she has always carried guidance within. And as she begins to trust this voice, she finds a new sense of direction that no external validation could have given her. Transformation begins in that trust, in the rediscovery that she is not lost but merely learning to navigate by her own compass. The power of silence stretches further still, for it teaches her to create. Without the clutter of constant communication, her mind finds room to imagine again. She begins to notice the details she once overlooked, the softness of dawn light through her window, the rhythm of her own heartbeat, the way ideas rise unbidden when space is finally granted to them. Out of silence grows clarity, and out of clarity grows creation. She may write words that surprise her, paint colors that reflect her truth, dream ideas that were waiting quietly for her attention. What once felt like emptiness reveals itself to be fertile ground, a space where her transformation roots itself deeply. And as she changes, she does not become smaller. She becomes expansive. She moves with a quiet confidence, no longer restless for constant noise, no longer dependent on another's presence to remind her of her worth. She transforms in her posture, in her choices, in her way of seeing the world. The silence has stripped her of illusions, peeled back the layers of dependence, and revealed the woman she always was, but had not fully recognized. This transformation is not loud, yet it is undeniable. It is seen in the way she carries herself, in the steadiness of her gaze, in the way she speaks less, but means more when she does. For silence has refined her into something fuller, stronger, more radiant, and she continues to evolve with every breath of quiet that surrounds her.